if you think about your future generations, that you have to think about forestry as a continuum, and you have to be a steward.
Our forestry future could be very bleak, and we could get there very quickly if we're not careful.
And it's not just forestry's fault, it's the public's fault for not wanting to accept the truth.
Understand very clearly the impacts of current management in terms of looking out in the long term.
I think if we take the time, no matter what it is that we're doing, if we can take some time in our lives to just be with nature.
Well, something, unfortunately, I think that the biggest problem is misunderstanding and not being able to really state the truth about what forestry practices are good and what forestry practices are bad. We tend to try and do things that the public will see as being, beneficial for forests or not harmful for forests when we're harvesting. But I think that's the thing. It's not misinterpretation, but our inability to explain it correctly.
On our own woodlot, I try to use practices that I think are sustainable, and the main one I try to use is what I like to call narrow gauge strip cuts, which I take a strip that's about 17 feet wide, and I make those strips at 54-foot intervals, so I'm leaving about 2/3 of the wood, and I take about 1/3. I've come to the conclusion, for me, that these strip cuts are the best way that I can do it, because that way it's a fairly economical way to cut wood. It's not like a selection harvest, which you're just taking the dead, dying, and suppressed, so the poorest quality trees, but you're also getting some of the better quality trees that are worth more money, but you're not changing the nature of the forest in any great way, and I guess that would be it.
It's important from the standpoint of sustainability. You have to go back to the three pillars: environmental, social, and economic. And more and more, there's better understanding that some parts of the landscape should be left alone. Some parts should be managed to create all different sorts of habitat. It's important that people understand that you need a whole range of forest conditions across the landscape, and that includes age classes from very young through to very old. And really, establishment of plantations and planted forests is one of the tools that you can use to everything from the economic side and sustainable wood supply, right through to restoration activities.
Windhorse Farm is actually, we like to say, it's the longest standing example of sustainable forestry in Canada. The forest here has been a managed working forest for over 170 years. And when you walk through our lands, it still looks like a fully healthy, vibrant, old-growth Acadian forest. We've generated a lot of timber off these lands, and yet we're also managing for a range of values and maintaining wildlife habitat and really a balanced, healthy ecosystem.
So what we're looking for in forestry is always to increase the dollar to biomass ratio, based on the understanding that wealth, we're all interested in wealth, right, in this culture. Well, wealth from a forest point of view is biological material. So how do you get more wealth into a forest? Well, wealth is only created at one point. It's created where sunlight is incident on chlorophyll. So that's where solar energy is transformed into biomass. That's the only place where wealth is created. After that, it can be redistributed, but it can't be created. So you want to have a forest that maximizes the creation of wealth. So you want a forest that has the greatest surface area of green leaves, green chlorophyll. So that's the kind of thing you want to think about when you say, what kind of forestry? How are we going to select trees for harvest? What kind of structural configuration do we want the forest to be? Well, that's the answer, because you want to create wealth as fast as possible. Then we hear a lot about forest health, right? Ecosystem health. Well, what's the relationship between forest health, and forest wealth? The wealthier a forest is, meaning the more biological material there is. So, well, the more biological material there is, the more capacity that forest has for hosting a diversity and abundance of life. Mm-hmm. So that's the definition of health. So forest health is the capacity to host an abundance and diversity of life. So the wealthier it is, the healthier it is. And how does it get wealthier? By being incredibly healthy, right? Because there's a lot of life here, there's a lot of chlorophyll here, there's a lot of transformation of solar energy into biomass. So as it becomes wealthier, it becomes healthier. As it becomes healthier, it becomes wealthier. So wealth and health in a forest exist in a positive feedback loop relationship. So then when you're talking about forestry practices, well, you have to understand that kind of relationship in order to say, okay, I get it. Then we'll do forestry in this particular way. So we have to do forestry in a way that really protects, and in some cases restores, if it's already been damaged, the ecological diversity, the total ecological diversity of the forest.
I think the biggest problem in forestry in Nova Scotia today is that we're trapped in an economic model that just cannot be sustained. We view our forests largely in the context of commodity products, that the only way that those products can compete in a global marketplace is by driving price and costs lower and lower, which means that we're putting more and more pressure on the people who work in the forests, and we're putting more and more pressure on the land. And I think as long as we view the forest in the context of a commodity market, we'll never be able to make it sustainable.
What we'll tend to do is think that we're at the apex of forest knowledge, and that we're never going to learn more about forestry. I think that's the wrong-headed approach to forestry. I like a forestry policy that has room in the future, some humility in it, and room in the future for that person that's coming that's going to have a better idea than me. So I guess the problem with I see in forestry now is that we do, if we look at things like clear cuts, there's no room in the future there. We're saying, okay, we're going to clear cut this and plant it in the species that we think is the best from here on. It seems like a big decision. If we make, and I do it with these strip cuts, if we make forestry decisions that don't change the composition of the forest, but instead just take a portion that we can use now, but leave enough for us so that in the future people will be able to make decisions about that forest that are left that will be better for us all.
I would say we have to look at how forests succeed naturally and sort of bring our forestry practices around to meet how forest succession occurs naturally. If you look at any event that clear cuts a forest, and there's all kinds of things that clear cut a forest, all kinds, there's a bunch, right? Hurricanes can clear cut a forest, an insect can clear cut a forest, a fire can clear cut a forest, or a forester can clear cut a forest. And if you look at the way the forester clear cuts, he takes out the main stem of the tree and leaves all the branches. And what happens in a case in the case, and a sort of a clear-cut case, is that in this province where there's lots of moisture, the moisture and the heat from the sun that now reaches all of these branches that are left on the forest floor decompose very rapidly, probably more rapidly than they would in an insect's clear-cut case, or a fire, or a hurricane. And the main stem is taken out, whereas in all the natural succession cases, the main stem is left in the forest and everything else is removed. The insects eat the foliage, the fire burns the foliage, or a hurricane blows it down, and you know what I mean, it's consumed by, you know, maybe fire, maybe some insect, but it's always the main stem that remains in the forest.
Well, we've not had the best track record in Nova Scotia, but I'd say recently some very encouraging things have happened. There is a changing conversation around forestry. I think in some ways it's a product of the fact that things have gotten so bad. You know, with major closures of big mills that were employers for hundreds of people. And seeing that kind of instability has caused everybody locally here to say, okay, we need to be looking for the alternatives, because this is too rough. This is too hard to see entire communities losing their jobs. And so I have seen the government make some of those investments, and that's very encouraging. And I think there are some examples. We should also not just think of these things in terms of Nova Scotia or PEI or New Brunswick, or for that matter Ontario or Quebec. We really need to be looking at a national and even international context to say, where are those best practices, and be willing to bring them here. So what if it started in Ontario? It's a good idea, so let's use it here. Community forestry, again, is a good example of that. It's successful in BC, and we're bringing it here. So, yeah, I do see some opportunity for the government to be involved and to make good investments and be willing to also bring in those best practices from across the country.
We need more humility in our forestry. We need more room for change in the future in our forestry. When we make a forestry decision and we say, okay, this is the way forests are going to be for the next 300 years. That doesn't make any sense. We need to make forestry decisions that leave room for that person down the road who's going to make a better forestry decision than us. And we know that for sure, because every forestry decision that we can see in the past, we look at it now with ridicule. We know that it was the wrong-headed decision. It was the best one they could think of, but it was poor. It was wrong. So I would like more humility in forestry. I would like more room, more forest left that could be managed in a different way in the future. And I guess that would be the key to me, to think, gee, we're not at the apex. We don't know everything about forestry management today, but we know in the future we're going to know more. So let's think of our forestry management today not as the absolute and change the forest in a drastic way, in the way that we think is best today, but let's leave enough for us. Let's leave enough room in our forestry practices so someone can have an idea in the future to change the way we do forestry.
There isn't any magic bullets, but in terms of solutions, in terms of ways to help us, there's all kinds of things that we can do.
So if I could offer one piece of advice, it would be find a way to make 2x4s, toilet paper, out of foliage, and leave the main stems in the woods.
Now go for a walk in the forest. Actually go out there, connect to it, and figure out what inspires them about the forest. And then make sure that the decisions they're making are actually in accord with that personal inspiration.
When we talk about forestry, I think a lot of people, when they think about forestry, well, what trees do you cut down? But really, that's almost, it's not beside the point, because that's important too. But it's based on that platform of really letting go, connecting, caring, and engaging in ways that are beneficial.